Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to Cloud and Bridge. Hopefully you're doing well. And so, before we begin things today, I want to take a moment and reflect upon the passage that we're going to be touching on in today's message. Because in this passage, Jesus is having a conversation with his friends, with his earliest followers, and he's speaking to them about the true nature of power, the true nature of God's power. And he also shares with them how they're supposed to relate to power, the power they have in their lives. So if you want to follow along with me, this comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 12, verses 24 through 26. This is what Jesus says. He says, "Very truly, I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. Anyone who loves their life will lose it, while anyone who hates their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. For whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be. My Father will honor the one who serves me." Thank you again for joining us, and we hope God blesses you through this time.
Serve God, love, and mend. No, this is not the end. Live unbruised, we are friends. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Sigh no more, no more. One foot in sea, one on shore. My heart was never pure. You know me. You know me. Oh, and man is a giddy thing. Oh, man is a giddy thing. Man is a giddy thing. Oh, man is a giddy thing. Love that will not betray, dismay or enslave. It will set you free. Be more like the man you were made to be. Oh, and there is a design, an alignment to cry of my heart to see the beauty of love as it was made to be. Oh, love that will not betray you, dismay or enslave you. It will set you free. Be more like the man that you were made to be. Oh, there is a design, alignment to cry of my heart to see the beauty of love as it was made to be. Beauty of love as it was made to be. The beauty of love as it was made to be.
So I want to continue this conversation we started last week about this very important topic of power. If you missed last week's message, it's okay. It was very simple, if not over simple, and it was short. But basically, we saw how when it comes to power, we can take two different approaches. We could take two different paths. We could take the path of the superhero. Think Superman or Wonder Woman. And this path sees the greatest good as our ability to exert power over others. But on the other hand, Jesus comes onto the scene and he showed us an alternative path, this path that's not well traveled, And in fact, many people have a hard time even seeing it because it's not the path of the superhero, but it's the path of the servant. And this path sees the greatest love as the ability to empower others for the sake of their flourishing. So I just want to continue this train of thought. I want to flesh it out a little bit more by looking at the reasons that underlie these two approaches. Basically, why would we choose one path over the other? And I think when we do this, it will allow us to see how we relate to power today. And more importantly, it will enable us to pivot our approach to power today, especially if we need it. And so what are these reasons? Well, I think these reasons revolve around how we quantify power. And I think we will take the path of the superhero when we see power as this limited resource. And we will take the path of the servant when we see power as this infinite gift. And so let's just jump into it. Let's look at the first reason. I think the path of the superhero is the path many of us take today because we truly do see power as this limited resource. We relate to it like it's a zero-sum game. There's only so much of it to go around. We relate to it like the bandwidth at our house, the internet, like only so many people can watch YouTube at the same time. We relate to it like cherry pie, that the first one who gets to it, and if somebody takes a big slice, then other people are going to be having smaller slices. We relate to it like we relate to space. And in fact, there's this parable that's been really helpful for me. It's the parable of manspreading. I don't know if you've ever heard of this phenomenon. You've probably experienced it, but apparently there's this habit amongst men, and apparently it's entirely men, even though it's not the entirety of men. But there's this tendency that when men take public transportation or they go into this public place, that when they plop down, and I'm using they, I'm a guy too, when we plop down, we splay our legs out as far and as wide as possible so as to take up as much space as possible, even when it comes at the cost of the inconvenience of others. And these are the others that are looking at us, wondering why we need to occupy 3 seats when clearly 1 seat is sufficient. However, I think manspreading is a great equivalent to power because the more comfort, the more freedom, and the more space one person enjoys means less comfort, less freedom, and less enjoyment for another person. And just like power, the more power one individual has in their hands, by necessity means there's less power that's accessible for countless others. And I think we truly see power in this way. We truly relate to it. We even speak about it. I mean, think about the language we use in our culture, in our country today when we talk about power. I think there is a word that we use more often than not, and that word is rights. This word rights is a power word. It's about the power that is due to us, the power that enables us to flourish, that gives us agency to make a future for ourselves. And this idea of rights, whether it's civil rights or human rights, goes far back to the inception of our country. Just think about the document, the Declaration of Independence, penned by the one and only Thomas Jefferson. Do you remember this sentence? Maybe you've heard it one time, maybe you've heard it 1,000 times, but just for the sake of reminder, let's read it. This is what he says. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and obviously today we know that his understanding of all men was not as expansive as our understanding of all men, but nonetheless, let's go on. And he says that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Oh, these words, they make me feel warm and fuzzy. It's almost as if rights are this gift that was put into a box and wrapped in a bow, and it just drops out of the heavens slowly until it falls into our hands. It's gift-giving language. However, I think it's kind of funny that he uses gift-giving language when, and this is the language we hear, but this is not the language we use today. When we think about rights, we don't think about them as a gift that's been handed to us. But I think we think about them as this prize that we've had to win and even fight for. Because I think, actually, regardless of what the Declaration of Independence says, I think our history says something different. Because when we think about rights, think about the history of our origin story, so excellently portrayed in Lin-Manuel Miranda's musical Hamilton. It's about how the founding fathers had to go to fisticuffs with the tyrannical yet nerdy King George, and they had to wrestle power out of his clenched fists so that we can attain the rights that we deserve to create our own future and create a country filled with prosperity. But I think the genius of this musical Hamilton is that it's not only about the origin of our country, but it's about the pattern of our country. And we see this in the people he casts for these roles. He casts minorities. I find this is interesting because I think it speaks to this truth that it wasn't just the founding fathers that had to fight for rights, but it's been many residents of our country. Just think about women and the women's suffrage movement. Or think about African Americans and the civil rights movement that continues even until today. That many people have had to pick up the good fight and fight for their rights. And I think this is a good thing. I don't think this is bad at all, because I think as people, we instinctively know we were meant for dignity. We are meant to have this power to produce good for our own lives and for the lives of our families and for the lives of our communities. But I believe this fight doesn't come without a cost. I believe there's this very dark side to this moon that we need to take seriously. Because I think if this is true, and I do think it's true, that if we've had to fight to attain our rights, we'll have to continue to fight to maintain those very same rights. If we've had to fight to get our rights, we're going to have to continue to fight to keep our rights. I think, and I believe truly, that if this is the case, then it effectively relegates us to living in a world that's filled with paranoia, with vigilance, and even violence. I mean, think about the paranoia of power that we are witnessing and experiencing today. We live in a time where we're tempted to see everything through the lens of a power struggle. All these things that have the potential for good, things like truth or journalism or the media, or things like economics or business or even entities like corporations, or things of beauty like art and music and even education have been reduced for many people to a means of manipulation where we've grown suspicious. And it's actually, we're at this fever pitch of paranoia right now, and it extends beyond that. I think where a lot of us in our paranoia, we've grown susceptible to even the craziest conspiracy theories, where we see behind every global and local event, even if it's a traffic jam on I-40, we see these nefarious secret organizations that are trying to pull puppet strings. To me, at least, it's silly. And I wish it stopped with paranoia. But paranoia is just the beginning. Paranoia can easily become vigilance. When somebody sits by us on the airplane and they stretch out their legs just a little bit, we feel threatened. We get put on guard. Are those people trying to take our space? Are they trying to move into our territory? Are they trying to take away our comfort? Just think about all the times when we hear those people over there. They're trying to take away our right to worship. And those people over there, they're trying to take away our right to protect ourselves. They want to steal our guns. Those people, they want to take away our right to control our own bodies. And those people want to take away our right to love who we want to love. But those people right there, they're the worst. They want to take our right away to not wear masks when we go into our local Walmart. I think many of us have felt threatened at some point. I think we have these fears that wrap themselves around our hearts. But vigilance logically leads, when we feel threatened enough, to the very real possibility of violence. Because what do we do when people invade our space one too many times? Well, we quickly run to the closet and we pull out our superhero cape and we put on our finest tights and we assemble the Avengers. We organize our powers, and maybe we don't have superpowers like laser vision or super strength, but boy, do we love to use the power that we have. We love to use our power in coercive, forceful, and even violent ways. And sometimes this use of power just looks like shaming and shunning, or silencing and suppressing, or canceling and boycotting, or physically, like imprisonment or beatings. And if things get bad enough, we will use the power of the threat of death. We will try to use the ultimate means of robbing somebody else of their power for the sake of our own power. And it's not just threats. Human history is filled with the follow-through of that threat and using death itself. We like to use power to preserve our own power. And I think we need to take this seriously, especially if we are Christians. Because we need to stop going to these pep rallies where people get us all riled up to go out into the world and to rally up 51% of the people to tell the other 49% of the people what to do. These rallies that make us feel like the people who are not like us are existential threats to our lives, or at least to the fabric of our society. Because I think there are high stakes involved with this. Because this is actually a lie about the nature of power. This is the world's reason for power. Because I think when we actually listen to God, we'll see that actually that the flourishing of our faith, the flourishing of the Christian faith, can never come at the cost of other people's flourishing. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not only a lie about the nature of power, but when we wield power irresponsibly or wrongly, and we try to exert power over others, I think we also proclaim a lie about the character of God. I don't know how many people I've talked to and I know who this is their greatest struggle and their greatest stumbling block. Their struggles and stumbling blocks, it's not intellectual, it's not rational, it's not going to be solved by more historical evidence or more logical proofs about the existence of God. No, they struggle with how Christians have unhealthily aligned themselves with certain forms of power. Because of what we do, they effectively see God as this all-powerful deity who wants to control and suppress and restrict their lives. A God who doesn't want them to be happy. And at the very least, they see Christian leaders as people who are willing to use the idea of God as a tool to do those very same things. People are very much struggling with this in real ways. They have been hurt by the way Christians and many of us have used power for our own gain at their cost. Because I think, and I really believe that we need to not just see God as all powerful, but we need to see God as all empowering. Because I think this is actually the countercultural perspective that the Bible gives us. We see a God who has a power that's not a power that's limited. It's not a limited resource, but it's an infinite gift. And we see this in the Bible from the beginning to the end. That's why I love the first chapter of the Bible. I love the beginning of this creation story. Because we see when God creates the world, he creates a world and he organizes the world into these environments of peace and prosperity, this place where life can flourish. But when he comes to his creation of people, the first words he speaks to them, these aren't words that are commanding, but he speaks words of blessing, these life-giving words, when he says to them, be fruitful and multiply. This is a game changer, because it changes our metaphors of war and fighting into metaphors of farming and agriculture. It changes our mathematics. It turns our problems of division into answers of multiplication. Because God in Genesis 1, when he creates humanity, he creates them by empowering them. He empowers them with authority to take care of this world. He empowers them with dignity, the dignity that is a reflection of God's own value and God's own power. He empowers them with ability and creativity to make things of this world, to further create environments of peace, to create tools that will increase our power and our ability to do good in this world. And the most interesting thing that I find when God creates humanity is he empowers them with multiplicity. That he sends humanity on this trajectory of ever-increasing relationships throughout generations and throughout geography that ends up in diversity. And these ever-increasing relationships were meant to become these networks of mutual empowerment. That power was not this thing that as humanity grew, the slices of the pie grew smaller. But that as humanity grew, empowerment meant that power itself grew. And I think this actually reveals some deep truth about what it means to be human, and this deep truth about the nature of humanity itself. We'll never be fully human until we're fully empowered by God. That they go hand in hand. And in fact, dehumanization happens when we take power from others. And I think and I believe that when we understand this, we will be able to adopt methodologies of empowerment. We'll be able to actually experience true power. We'll be able to taste God's power. And it's hard to see examples of this in our world, especially when we've been trained and conditioned to see everything through the lens of a power struggle. But they're out there. Sometimes they're hidden. My wife, for example, I love her. She's part of this cabal of very powerful Christian feminists who are secretly conspiring and plotting the good of all humanity. Now, that's not really actually true. They're not secretive and conspiratorial. They're very public. She's part of this organization, this group of women called the Women of Vision. And they happen to be an arm of one of the biggest Christian humanitarian ministries in the world called World Vision. But the Women of Vision, they have this very powerful mission. And it's simple. It's empowered women, empowering women for the good of the entire world. And they do things like raise funds, and they organize projects that empower women, especially women in developing countries. And they do things like build wells in villages and communities. Why? Because you know who goes to get the daily allotment of water? Do you know who walks 6 miles each way women do. And can you just imagine what they could do with that extra time and energy? And they do things like education, and they teach business skills. They help empower them to do economic development. They show them that the role in their society, in their community that they've inherited isn't necessarily the role that they have to buy into. Like things like childhood marriages. And this organization is so inspiring to me. And they're not necessarily about women's rights, but I think that might be a derivative of it. But I think they're about something even more powerful. They're about empowering the flourishing of women. Because when these women flourish, it's not only them that flourish, but it's the entirety of their community that flourishes. It's everybody that flourishes. And these methodologies proclaim the truth about God, and they proclaim the truth about God's power. That power is indeed this infinite gift. The more we give to others, the more that is available to all people. It's not a zero-sum game. The flourishing of one is the flourishing of all. And I think over the next few weeks, we're going to look at this in more detail. Next week, actually, we're going to look at different ways that God has potentially empowered us to empower others. We're actually going to look at how institutionally we can create these institutions that empower others as well. But we need to actually really take these methodologies of empowerment seriously. Because actually, I think God's power and empowerment are the solutions and the answers to a lot of the threats that we feel. Because I think empowerment is counterintuitive. Because a lot of the threats that we feel are not the result of other people having power. Quite the contrary. I think a lot of the problems that we see are the result of other people feeling powerlessness, whether that's crime or anything. And so the solution is actually not us trying to take power from others, but us trying to empower them with more power. And that's not always the case, because it's not just powerless that causes issues and that has destructive tendencies, but it's people who have actually a lot of power and love power a little too much that actually are quite destructive as well. But God's power has a lot of potential for our world, because we're created for empowerment. But empowerment is not just something that we are created for, but empowerment is also the thing that will redeem us. Because if we come full circle back to the scripture that I read at the beginning of our time together, this conversation that Jesus had with his disciples, with his friends, we actually see that this conversation takes place at the intersection of these two paths of power, these two approaches to power. That when Jesus shows up on the scene, and this is consistent throughout all four of the Gospels, all the stories of the Gospels, he shows up amidst all these different leaders of religious leaders and political leaders. And when he shows up, they are stricken with paranoia, because Jesus is not playing according to the rules of their power games. He's not trying to climb the same ladders that they had to climb to attain power. He just simply lives a life that is already empowered. He lives the life that is empowered by God and empowered because he is God. And their paranoia becomes vigilance. Because when he starts enacting these methodologies of empowerment, they are very threatened. When he heals people, when he teaches people in authority, when he elevates people like women to their place of dignity, when he includes people who are voiceless on the outskirts of society and he gives them the seat of honor and he listens to them, when he does the greatest acts of empowerment, like waking people to life from the sleep of death that they're trapped in. Their feelings of threat become insurmountable. And they quickly move on to violence. And this is why Jesus is having this conversation. He's having this conversation pretty much with them, but it's almost as if he's speaking to himself. Because he has this conversation that harkens back to the blessing of be fruitful and multiply. Very agricultural, very much multiplication. Because what does he say? Unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. If you try to preserve your own power, it's ever only gonna be a limited resource. But if the seed dies, it produces many seeds. If you sacrifice the power and you empower others, it's only going to multiply. And this is the approach that he takes. He is the one who loves his life by losing it. He's the one who hates his own life. That's the powerful language he uses, so that he can keep it to eternal life. He is this seed that dies. Because what does he do? He puts himself into the hands of the surrounding authorities. And they use power to imprison him, to mock him, to beat him. And ultimately, they put him on a cross. But here we see the true intersection of power where these two approaches meet. Because these leaders who wanted to take his life by force, that very same life is the life that he gave freely to them, for them, on behalf of them. It's the life that he sacrificed out of love for them, for his enemies, and for all humanity. And this love exposes the frailty and the weakness of the power that we try to preserve. And it should shake us and it should sober us. But the seed is taken off the cross and it's buried. And in the power of God, on the third day, it sprouts. And we see the beauty of true resurrection power. The resurrection power that says God's infinite power, this power that's for us, will always be greater than any power we can muster against him. This resurrection power is the power that says God's forgiveness is what liberates us to true life. Because what is the nature of forgiveness? Well, forgiveness is letting go of any wrong that somebody has done against us. It's letting go of the power that we can hold over others, that we can hold against others. It's giving others the ability to live in relationship to us. These empowering relationships. And all these things, I think the cross and the resurrection, I think Jimi Hendrix succinctly puts it well. It's at this intersection of the cross and the resurrection where the power of love overcomes the love of power. And so today, I want us to come to this intersection. I want us to know that when we see the power of Jesus, the power poured out on our behalf, we come to a fork in the road. And we can choose to we can choose to put on our capes, or we can choose to carry our cross. And I think this is the choice that many people have had to take throughout history. But many people who've encountered Jesus have experienced deep paradigm shifts, whether it's Paul, this early church leader who was initially threatened by the Christian movement. He persecuted Christians. In fact, he was the accomplice to many of their deaths. When he encountered Jesus, this resurrected Jesus, not the idea of Jesus, not this idea of power, but Jesus the person, he shifted and he became somebody who started sacrificially giving his life away to others and teaching other people about the love of God in Christ. So much so that he eventually ended up experiencing the death of martyrdom himself. And this is true for many others, whether it's St. Francis of Assisi or our very own Martin Luther King Jr., who lived not as somebody who was trying to attain power, but lived this very strong presence of somebody who was already empowered, who walked upright, who lived with honor and dignity. And his life was a protest and a challenge to the powers of the world. And I think he knew, inevitably, that his path to eternal life went through a cross. And his life was taken from him by these powers. But I truly believe that his life was a seed that died and has produced much life for other people. And so, what path will you choose today? Will you take off your cape and will you carry your cross? Because I think if in the power of Jesus, this power that he gives us, this power that enables us to pivot, if we change paths, we can stop heading towards this world that's war-torn, this world that demands that we dig these eternal trenches to protect our power. And it can set us to this new trajectory towards a world, the world that is filled with God's presence, his love, and his power. This world that's this ever-expanding garden that's filled with human flourishing and peace and prosperity. I pray that today you start encountering the love of God and the power of God in a very real way. The world needs it. Thank you, guys, and hopefully you have a great week. God bless.